Cannabis was never meant to get you high. It was meant to wake you up. You've been sold a story that it's just recreational, just for unwinding, just a way to chill or numb or float above your stress for a while. But that's not the real story. That's the distraction. Strip away the smoke, the stereotypes, the party culture, and what you find underneath isn't just a plant, it's a forgotten key, a sacred technology, a messenger hiding in plain sight. You see, cannabis is older than your history books will tell you. It's not just something ancient civilizations stumbled on for fun. It was revered, ritualized, protected. Egyptian priests didn't just know about it. They used it deliberately, intentionally within ceremony. The Vedic texts in India called it the conqueror of sorrow. In shamanic traditions across the globe, cannabis wasn't a drug. It was a doorway. Somehow we ended up passing joints in parking lots, chasing a sensation while missing the message. This isn't a story about getting stoned. This is about seeing clearly, about remembering something sacred that was buried on purpose. And if you're here, if you're still watching, you might be ready to remember what was hidden. Let's begin. From the very beginning of human civilization, we didn't just survive by eating plants. We communed with them, we sang to them, we listened. There was reverence, and of all the sacred flora, one plant stood apart: cannabis. It wasn't treated casually. It wasn't burned or smoked the way we see it today. It was used by initiates not for escape, but for vision. In the temples of Kemet, what we now call Egypt, there are carvings and symbols showing bowls of sacred oils, incense, and among them, cannabis. Not a metaphor, not folklore. Real historical evidence that this plant was part of priesthood practice. And Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, he left more than cryptic teachings. He left instructions. The emerald tablets weren't just poetic riddles, they were blueprints, encoded directions for transformation, and buried in those verses are references to a green messenger, a plant of vision. Today, we call it the third eye. Back then, they called it the eye of Horus. And they weren't talking about fantasy. They were describing a precise spiritual technology, a way of activating the mind's inner vision. But cannabis wasn't used alone. It was always paired with breath, with frequency, with intention. This was never about getting high. It was about getting aligned. The ancients knew the plant itself was neutral, a mirror, an amplifier. What you brought to it shaped the experience. That's why it was paired with ritual, with sacred geometry, with sound. This wasn't drug use. It was spiritual engineering. Over time, that knowledge was fractured, colonized, branded. What was once sacred became scandalized. What once opened the veil was labeled a vice. And we were left with just the shadow of something extraordinary. Look at how we use it today, casually, habitually, often without thought. But even now, the plant whispers, you felt it. Maybe the first time you used it, something shifted. The world slowed. The walls between your thoughts grew thin. You saw something, maybe light, maybe fear, maybe laughter, that didn't make sense but felt like truth. That moment wasn't just a high, that was the veil flickering. But without grounding, without intention, that doorway becomes unstable. And instead of revelation, we spiral. The ancients understood something that modern science is only just starting to rediscover. There's a system in your body, a biological structure designed specifically to interact with this plant. It's called the endocannabinoid system, and it's wired throughout your brain, your nervous system, your immune response. No other plant interacts with it like cannabis. None. It's as if they were made for each other. And maybe they were. The question isn't why cannabis fits so perfectly with the human body. The question is, who designed the fit across continents, cultures that never met, from Vedic sages in India to Taoist alchemists in China to Egyptian priests? All spoke of this plant not as a narcotic, but as a liberator. The Vedas called it Vijaya, the bringer of joy. In China, it was known as the herb that frees the spirit. What if this wasn't just folklore? What if they were all pointing to the same thing? A key, a sacred key that could open doors inside you no pill ever could. And yet today, we use it to check out instead of check in. We run from silence, numb ourselves from pain, and we wonder why the experience feels empty. But some haven't forgotten. Shamans in the Amazon still use the green smoke as a portal, not a pit. Rastafarian elders chant before they inhale, tuning the mind to the divine frequency. Even in the worn hieroglyphs of Egypt, You'll find references to hours-long ceremonies using cannabis with oil, sound, and breath, because cannabis isn't the destination, it's the beginning. And used correctly, it opens something ancient inside you. Not a hallucination, a mirror, but like any mirror, it only reflects what's already there. Without intention, that reflection becomes distorted. It confuses, scares, or numbs. But with intention, it can reveal what's been buried for lifetimes. And that's what we're reclaiming. This video isn't just about cannabis, it's about consciousness. It's about using forgotten tools to remember who you are. So before we go any deeper, let me offer you a key. We created a space called Insights Academy, a free newsletter where we share what YouTube won't let us say. No algorithms, no filters, just ancient knowledge, modern science, and real practical tools for awakening. And if you sign up today, we'll send you a free copy of the Kybalion, a Hermetic text that's guided truth seekers for over a century. Because the truth is, cannabis doesn't give you vision. It shows you what's always been there, hidden beneath noise, buried under distraction. You were never meant to numb out. You were meant to wake up. There's a reason this plant has survived every attempt to silence it. It's not just durable, it's intelligent, conscious, alive. And like all teachers, it waits for the right moment to speak, not when you're distracted, anxious, or scrolling, but when you're present, when your breath slows and your inner world begins to still. That's when something ancient stirs, a feeling, a knowing, a remembrance, because cannabis was never about the high. It was about the entry point, the moment the fog clears, the veil lifts, and suddenly you see, but seeing requires preparation. That's what the mystics knew. That's why their temples weren't just buildings, they were tuning chambers, acoustic sanctuaries designed to shape consciousness. The walls echoed with sacred frequencies. The air was thick with frankincense, blue lotus, and cannabis smoke. And in that space, awareness changed. They weren't chasing visions, they were receiving them. The chants, the oils, the breath, it was all deliberate. Ritual wasn't about superstition. It was about engineering perception. Today we scroll instead of chant. We consume instead of commune. But deep down, the memory is still in us, in our DNA, in the way our bodies relax when we breathe deeply, in the way cannabis feels familiar the very first time, because it's been with us for lifetimes. And here's the truth most people never hear. You don't need more product, you need more presence. You don't need higher doses, you need higher awareness. Because cannabis doesn't create magic, it reveals what was always there. The sacred system buried in your biology, the internal chemistry of insight. Every breath you take activates it, every chant amplifies it, every quiet moment makes space for it. And when you combine that with the plant, with intention, something happens. You don't just feel different, you become different. You don't just think differently, you remember who you are. That's the purpose, that's the ritual. And it's not for sale in dispensaries, it begins with you. Because once you realize your nervous system is a sacred instrument, you start tuning it. You stop chasing numbing highs and start seeking clarity. You stop lighting up to forget. You start lighting up to remember. And the plant, it responds. It always has. Used with reverence, it becomes a guide. Used with care, it becomes a mirror. Used with truth, it becomes a portal. But here's what they don't want you to know. You don't need to consume endlessly to reach those states. In fact, the most powerful high you'll ever feel comes from your own body. Your inner cannabis, your anandamide is waiting for breath, for stillness, for ritual. That's why monks can reach ecstasy with no substance, why yogis sit in stillness and see galaxies, why mystics breathe and unlock ancient memory. They weren't escaping reality, they were entering it deeper than anyone thought possible. And now you can too, but only if you remember that this plant was never meant to be a crutch. It was meant to be a compass, a key, not the castle, a doorway, not the destination. Because the ultimate realization, you are the portal. Your breath is the sacred rhythm. Your body is the divine circuitry. Your voice is the ancient chant. And your awareness, when clears, the flame that lights the way. You were never meant to sleepwalk through this life. You were meant to awaken, to see, to feel it all. That's what cannabis reminds you of. And when approached with truth, when used in ceremony, not as escape, but as alignment, it opens you, not to fantasy, but to reality, stripped bare, clear, unshackled. So what happens next is your choice. You can keep using the plant like a product or reclaim it as the powerful ally it truly is. You can scroll past this video or sit with it, feel it, let it echo, because if something inside you whispered, I have always felt this plant was more than just a high, then you're not alone. You're remembering, and when you remember, you begin to awaken others. Start with one ritual, one moment of silence, one breath before the flame, one sacred dose, one frequency to guide the way. And in that simplicity, the sacred returns. Welcome back.